So what do you think about the guy? Katie asked her husband's side and replied, "It's still not exactly what I was looking for. I kind of expected it anyway. Where do you even find those freaks?" David asked his wife, "What the heck are you talking about? I'm trying to do something, at least, and you only know how to criticize what I'm doing." The young couple were arguing about yet another chef for their restaurant who was found by Katie. He wasn't exactly what they were looking for. "What I'm saying is that you need to be more thorough in your research and make sure that the chef you're bringing in is the right fit for the restaurant. David, it's not enough to just pick someone at random and expect it to work out. We need to make sure that we're getting the best person possible." Katie sighed. "I knew that you were right. I just feel like you're being too critical. I'm trying my best to find the right person for the job, but it's not easy. I'm doing the best I can." David put his arm around her. "I know you are. I'm sorry if I came across as too critical. I just want to make sure we get the best person for the job. I think if we work together and do a thorough search, we can make sure that we find the perfect chef for our restaurant." Katie put the folder on the table and said, "This is our account. This month, our restaurant is beating all the records. We didn't lose anything, but we didn't make anything. Katie said we didn't have these issues when Dad was managing. Maybe it makes sense to turn to him for some help." David jumped up. No, don't even think about telling him anything. I'll think of something. Why do you always think that I can't do anything without your father, because you can't do anything on your own? I think we need to talk to him before it's too late. We don't have any other options anyway. Look at the numbers. In a couple more months, we won't even be able to cover the salaries." David thought for a second. Of course, what Katie was saying was unfortunately true, but David didn't want to give up. He knew he could come up with something to say to the restaurant. "I'll think of something," he said resolutely. "I'm not ready to give up yet, honey. We need a new chef, someone old school, you know, someone who doesn't taste the trends." Katie sighed and said, "We do need a chef. I've been thinking about it, but where can we find the right guy? It has to be someone unique to get the restaurant out of this hole. We just need to keep looking." David said the restaurant was once owned by David's father-in-law. David used to work as an administrator under his guidance. It was during his time at the establishment that he crossed paths with Katie, who also happened to be employed there. As fate would have it, their connection blossomed quickly, and the two of them found themselves drawn to one another over the course of merely 6 months. Their relationship evolved from co-workers to husband and wife, with David becoming an integral part of Katie's family. During this period, the father-in-law gradually began to delegate more responsibilities to David, entrusting him with various aspects of the restaurant's operations. The time will come when I'll need to step back and rest, and you and Katie will have to manage the restaurant on your own. I hope that by then you'll have learned everything necessary. I don't want your children to go hungry." David was full of innovative ideas for enhancing the restaurant, but Mr. Bunsfield would often shoot them down or even worse, ridicule them. "Slow down. If something is working perfectly fine, there's no need to change it." Mr. Bunsfield would caution David to come home and live it. "That old man has no clue what the modern world is all about. No one cooks like that anymore. You won't find a single restaurant with such outdated decor." On the one hand, Katie hated hearing such negative remarks about her father, but on the other hand, David was her husband, and she believed in his vision. David's frustrations subsided a bit as he hugged his wife. "I can't wait. I have so many ideas," and he just dismisses them without a second thought. "I'm doing all this not for me, but for Melissa." Melissa, who was about to turn 15, was a bright and charming girl. She excelled academically, earning straight A's and engaging in numerous clubs and extracurricular activities. Both David and Katie were incredibly proud of their daughter's accomplishments. Mr. Bunsfield had an unwavering love for his granddaughter Melissa, and he was prepared to do anything to ensure her happiness and well-being. When Melissa turned 14, he made a significant and heartfelt gesture to express his devotion during her birthday celebration. He solemnly presented the keys to the restaurant to his daughter Katie and son-in-law David, symbolizing the transfer of ownership and trust in their ability to carry on the family business. "I hope I've imparted enough wisdom to you and that you won't let the restaurant falter. I've invested my entire life and soul into this business," Mr. Bunfield said earnestly. David visibly moved and replied, "Thank you so much. I won't let you down. The family business will only continue to thrive if the intention to grow the restaurant is genuine." David's approach diverged from what had been successful in the past. He became convinced that the establishment needed a complete renovation to modernize its appeal. With this belief, he overhauled the concept and made sweeping changes to both the menu and the ambience. Unfortunately, these alterations did not have the desired effect. Profits began to decline gradually as the once thriving family business struggled to adapt to its new identity. A few years after implementing the changes, David came to the painful realization that his vision for the restaurant had not succeeded. With a heavy heart, he decided to revert to the original concept, hoping to recapture the magic that once made the establishment. Sadly, it proved to be too late. The loyal customers who had frequented the restaurant for years had since found other places to dine, and they did not return despite their reinstatement of the old concept. Additionally, the highly skilled chef, who had been renowned for his exceptional cooking, refused to rejoin the team. As a result, the restaurant continued to find her showing no signs of improvement or recovery. Katie inquired about what guests. David's eyes widened as he suddenly clutched his hand, realizing he had completely forgotten about the impending visit. "Do you think we can ask Melissa to cancel or postpone it?" Katie sighed before responding, "I don't think she will. It's too late now, they've already been informed." David fell silent for a moment before speaking up again. "I don't know, we've only met them once, and they already want to meet the parents. You know how Melissa is, she's stubborn, and she definitely takes after her grandpa in that regard." "Yeah, she does well. Let's prepare to meet her future relatives." Then, due to the overwhelming workload and the challenges at the restaurant, David had genuinely forgotten that Melissa was getting engaged, and a cause and hustle between home and work he had lost sight of. Simply living and enjoying life's precious moments. Ironically, this was the exact outcome he had sought to avoid when he had dreamed of becoming a successful businessman. Almost 30 years ago, David left his provincial hometown in the northern states and moved to the city to escape his past. He was determined to make a fresh start and build a new life for himself. As a diligent student, he managed to balance his studies with a part-time job working the night shift as a security guard. Eventually, he found himself employed at Mr. Bunsfield's restaurant, where he decided to stay no matter what challenges he faced to sweeten the deal. Katie, the beautiful daughter of the owner, captured his heart, making everything seem perfect for David over the years. David achieved the success he had always dreamed of, not without its fair share of hurdles. As a father, he hoped that his daughter Melissa would find a partner who was not only loving but also financially secure. His motivation for this desire was not rooted in personal gain, rather, he simply wanted to ensure his daughter's well-being and happiness. He yearned for her to enjoy life without the worries and struggles that he himself had experienced. David was not entirely familiar with the background of Melissa's prospective partner or his family. As a result, he could only hope that everything would unfold according to his wishes. The following day, a crisis erupted at the restaurant. A high-profile guest had chosen to dine at their establishment, and as luck would have it, he was the one who discovered the strand of hair in his meal. His outraged response was so loud that it seemed as if windows would shatter. David immediately recognized the gravity of the situation and knew that it would take more than just altering the menu to resolve the issue. He would have to make sweeping changes, including replacing members of the staff after tense negotiations. David, the disgruntled customer, managed to reach an agreement, although the resolution came at a significant cost to David, who arrived home exhausted and frustrated. David was greeted at the entrance by Melissa. "Dad, I was about to call you. I thought you were late again." Seeing his daughter's face, David's heart instantly melted. "Baby, how could I? You're my treasure, sweetie, all right? Dad, let me take your jacket, Mark, and his mom will be arriving soon, Mark. I've heard that name so many times that I can't wait to finally find out who they really are, Dad. They're wonderful people, and you'll see they're so nice and kind." David smiled, but couldn't help thinking to himself, nice and kind, huh? Not the most advantageous traits in these times. David was still in the process of changing his clothes when the doorbell rang, signaling the timely arrival of the guests. As everyone gathered around the table, they began to engage in conversation, getting to know one another better. They even scrutinized the guests with keen interest. Mrs. McAllister. Mark's mother appeared robust with rosy cheeks, and she greeted everyone with a wide smile. After exchanging pleasantries and enjoying some coffee, David began to ask Mark questions about his life and aspirations. "So Mark, tell us about your plans for the future." Well, I'm finishing school in 2 months, and I'm planning to join KB Works. Mark replied, I've heard of that company. What makes you so confident that they will hire you? They would ask curiously. I completed an internship there, and they offered me a position afterward. Mark explained at that moment that Mark's mother, Mrs. McAllister, had chimed in. Mark is such a responsible young man, he always achieves what he sets his mind to, but enough about business. We brought you some homemade pickles as a gift, don't worry, we made them ourselves using fresh and natural cucumbers, as Mrs. McAllister proudly displayed jar after jar of pickles and jams on the table. David and Katie exchanged glances. They had always considered themselves part of a more affluent circle, and the scene before them seemed rather peculiar. The host exchanged another look, and David, unable to resist, asked if you guys were farmers or something. Mrs. McAllister laughed and replied, Of course you've got to have a farm in the country. At that moment, she began placing eggs on the table as well. Expressions of disdain slowly appeared on Katie and David's faces. Katie eyed some of the eggs with odd stains on them and likely guessed their origin. So you have chickens too, huh? She inquired. Oh yes, we have lots of chickens. You should try my roasted chicken sometime, it's delicious. Mrs. McAllister offered enthusiastically. Kitty interrupted. So you guys are basically villagers, huh? Confused by the sudden change in tone, Mark's mother nodded hesitantly. Katie's demeanor shifted as she mumbled onto her breath, barely audible, as if we didn't already have enough problems. She shook her head and rolled her eyes. David couldn't contain his laughter. He gestured for Katie to follow him into the kitchen. David began, How many times did that tell you that we needed to talk to Melissa? I mean, they're hillbillies, honey. Look at her. She's still taking out her dirty form stuff on our expensive table. We're going to have to do some serious cleaning once they leave, unbeknownst to them. Melissa had quietly approached the kitchen and overheard the entire conversation. She walked in and confronted her parents, Dad, and Mom. What's wrong with you two? Why are you acting like this? David and Katie laughed it off. Honey, you can't be serious about Mark, can you? He's not the type of guy you want to be with. I mean, he'll take you back to his dirty old farm, and you'll spend the rest of your life shoveling manure and tending to animals. Tears welled up in Melissa's eyes as she struggled to contain her emotions. Wow, just wow. I can't believe I'm actually hearing all this. She left the kitchen and returned to the table. Babe, what's wrong? What happened? Mark asked his girlfriend. Honey, did you hurt yourself? Let me see. Mark's mother inquired, thinking Melissa might have touched something hot or sharp in the kitchen at that moment. David and Katie returned to the table, having reached the consensus in private. Katie began to speak. My husband and I have talked, and we think there's too big of a gap between us. I'm sorry to say this, but we don't think we can keep this relationship going. I don't understand what you're talking about, Mrs. Harris. Mrs. McAllister asked, her smile gradually fading. Mark furrowed his brow, glanced at Melissa's tear-streaked face, and then at her parents. It was at that moment that the situation became all too clear to him. Mark gently guided his mother towards the door, and Melissa quickly followed them. Sweetheart, please don't go. David pleaded with Melissa as she stood by the door. Shame on you guys. Melissa retorted, slamming the door behind her. She'll be back. You'll see. She'll thank us when the time comes. David said, trying to reassure himself, and Katie clinked their glasses and downed their wine, hoping to find solace in their decision. Melissa attempted to catch up with Mark and his mother, but they had already driven off. She tried calling him repeatedly, but he kept declining her calls. Melissa texted him to say she didn't share her parents' views and that her decision to be with him remained unchanged. Mark texted back, explaining that he needed some time to think and asking her to give him some space, feeling lost and heartbroken. Melissa spent the evening wandering around the city alone. Tears streamed down her face, and she couldn't bring herself to return home at that moment. The only person she wished she could confide in was her grandfather, Ben. After his wife's passing, Ben led a solitary life in his house, which was situated not too far from Melissa's home. Feeling the need for comfort and understanding, Melissa made up her mind to pay her grandfather a visit. She poured out her heart to Grandpa. Ben recounted everything that had transpired at the house, and he was not pleased. Honey, your parents are young and still haven't realized something very important. You go home and get some rest. Despite the late hour, Ben decided to visit David and Katie. He entered their house quietly and approached the table where they were in the process of cleaning up and placing the items Mark and his mother had brought into plastic bags. "Hey Dad, what are you doing here so late?" Ben didn't respond right away. Instead, he calmly walked over to the table and sat down. He requested a plate, knife, and fork to open the jars. "David," he instructed, "you mean the pickles?" "Yeah." David opened one of the jars and handed it to his father-in-law. Ben cut a small piece from one of the pickles and savored it with delight. Delicious. It reminds me of something so dear and special to me." Intrigued by the smell, David raised his eyebrows. "This is an interesting smell. I've never smelled anything like it." He took a pickle from the jar, and upon taking a bite, she froze with joy. Katie, curious, decided to try one as well. "Honey, these are so delicious. I've never tried them either." She peered into the bag to see what else was inside. "Look, there are some salads, and there's dried meat. It smells delicious." "It's called jerky," Ben corrected them. David sampled everything that Mark and his mother had brought, then leaned back on the sofa. Ben let out a deep sigh before speaking. "Katie, sweetheart, when I first met your mom, she was such a wonderful person, and I knew she was the one, but guess what? She and I were what you'd call hillbillies. These pickles and everything on this table are so dear to me. They remind me of where I come from, and I'll never forget that your mom and I worked hard to get where you are now. You were born into this life by this point." Katie understood where the conversation was heading. David hung his head low, anticipating what was to come now. "David, when you first came to work at my restaurant, you didn't have much either. I didn't keep you there because you were good at your job. My daughter liked you, and I was willing to do anything for her." David knew exactly what Ben was referring to. Ben rose from a seat as quietly as he had arrived and left the house. David and Katie stood there for a moment, then proceeded to try more of the farm-fresh food, finding themselves enjoying it immensely. The following day, Ben took his granddaughter Melissa in his truck and drove to the village, where Mark and his mother lived. They arrived just as the two were having lunch. Ben introduced himself and asked if he could have some more jerky, which made everyone laugh. They all sat together, talking about the old days on the farm. Ben shared his story of growing up around animals and how it taught him frugality and hard work. The conversation touched Mrs. McAllister's heart, and she took Ben's words as an apology for his daughter's and son-in-law's actions. Mark and Melissa had gone for a walk, returning later with smiles on their faces. "Mark, I can see that you're a hardworking man. Your mother has told me all about you. You're the kind of guy I wouldn't mind having alongside my granddaughter after saying their goodbyes." Ben and Melissa left for home. On the way back, Melissa thanked her grandpa for his wisdom and for handling the situation so well. A month later, at Mr. Buntsfield's request, David and Katie arrived at the restaurant wearing waiters' uniforms. "I don't know why we're closed today or why I'm wearing this uniform," Katie said to David, clearly disappointed, when Ben entered the hall. Katie asked her father, "What's all this about?" "We did what you asked us to do. Can we take these uniforms off now? The banquet has yet to begin." "Patience, sweetheart. In a few moments, there will be two very important guests here. I want you to meet them and ensure they are seated and served." Katie assumed her father had organized the event to teach her husband how to manage a restaurant or something similar. She had no idea who was about to walk in. A few minutes later, Mark and Mrs. McAllister entered, smiling and looking absolutely stunning. "Welcome to our restaurant. Please be seated." When David and Katie saw them, they were shocked, but soon they realized what had happened. Ben approached David and Katie, who stood there with their heads bowed, said the best apology is changed behavior. "Now go and show them your hospitality. After all, Mrs. McAllister is your new chef." A year has passed. "Is everything ready, Mark?" David asked his son-in-law. "Yes, sir, all," said Mark replied. "Well, all right. Make sure everything goes smoothly." "Of course, don't worry, we're all prepared." Today, the restaurant was closed for the second time in its history, despite numerous calls to reserve tables. The founder of the restaurant, Ben Buntsfield, was turning 80, and his family had organized a surprise dinner for him. He knew nothing about the event. They had told him to be at the restaurant by 5 in the afternoon. When he arrived and realized that the restaurant was empty, he suspected that something was up. The surprise worked perfectly for the first time. Dave, his father-in-law, smiled at him and said, "I've known you all these years, and only now can I say that I wasn't wrong about you. Thank you for everything, sir. Thank you for teaching me how to be a human being and see things differently. From a boss to a father figure, you shaped me into a man." David said Ben was touched. He looked around and asked, "By the way, where's Melissa?" "She said she had to drop by the hospital." "What makes her sick?" "What happened?" Ben asked, frightened. "I don't think so, sir. I think she's got a surprise for you." Melissa arrived half an hour after the celebration started. "Grandpa, happy birthday." "I'm sorry. I got held up a little." "Well, now I can safely say that in 5 months you're going to be a great-grandfather." Ben couldn't believe what he was hearing. He was overjoyed. "Mark, and I want to name him Ben, in your honor." Grandpa Ben hugged Melissa and cried. "It's one of the best gifts in my life. Thank you so much." Mr. Bunsfield looked at Katie and David, who were standing next to their new relatives, Mark and Mrs. McAllister. He approached all of them and thanked them for the wonderful children they had raised. 5 months passed quickly. Grandpa didn't want to stay at home at all. He paced back and forth impatiently in front of the maternity hospital. "Why is it taking so long?" he asked. Katie turned to him and said, "Dad, you're tired. Let me get you a taxi. If I need one, I will call it myself." At that moment, the main door opened, and the nurse came out, congratulating everyone. David hugged his son-in-law's mother, and they went in circles, laughing as if it weren't for your cucumbers. "Mrs. McAllister, I don't even know how it would all turn out. Everything turned out really well." Indeed, it took a while for Mrs. McAllister to get used to her new role as a chef in the family restaurant, which now attracts many customers. Mrs. McAllister was an excellent chef. She was simply destined to cook delicious meals. Anyone who tried her cooking would automatically get hooked. David paid her very well, not only because she was a good chef, but also because they were now one family.